I would submit to you this is absolutely the worst possible thing that you should be doing in this kind of economic environment. I wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal that appeared in March on the same subject, and a few people said, you know, we never thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. Because if you think of it, this is really the time for leadership on the part of procurement to support and sustain our supply chains, not to put people out of business. And I would also submit to you that those organizations that are smart, the ones that are in fact sustaining their suppliers and working with them, extending their contracts, giving them improved payment terms, those are the ones that are going to drive that relationship. And when the economy ticks and turns around, those are going to be the suppliers that will be there for you. And those that are ready for it, that are ready to increase production, increase their levels of spending, of capital projects, those that have the best supplier relationships with healthy suppliers are going to be the ones who are going to win, and they're going to win big. So that's sort of the theme that I want to really come across today, if at all possible. You know, in the past it was interesting. Financial risk, we've done a lot of research on supply risk. Financial risk was typically accounting for less than 10% of the major supply disruptions that occurred. Today that number is more like 20 or 30%. So the number of key participants in the supply chain that are facing foreclosures, that are facing bankruptcies is going up at a tremendous level. And you just pick up the newspaper and you can see Smurfit Stone Containers, business that's been around for 100 years, Chapter 11. The number of bankruptcies in 2008 has actually doubled and is projected to go up even further in 2009. How are we going to be able to step on the gas when things turn around and expect to accelerate if we don't have any spark plugs, if we don't have any fuel, if we don't have a carburetor, if we don't have suppliers who are there to produce the products and services that we need to grow? I mean, it just makes absolutely no sense at all. And I really think it's going to get worse before it gets better. 2008, bankruptcies were up 74%. Corporate bond rates, I mean, corporate bonds are supposed to be a stable source of returns. They could go up as high as 18.5%. That's just insane. That's just crazy. And bankruptcies are going to go up at least a third over 2008 levels. So we're going to see more companies who just shut their gates, send people home. And it's not always because of, you know, the business. In many cases, these are healthy businesses with good products, good service levels. But, you know, most mid to small sized businesses run their business on commercial paper, on lines of credit. And if you can't meet payroll, if you can't pay suppliers and your customers are squeezing you, you don't have any choice. It's pretty simple. Well, the danger here, of course, is that as you start looking at these supply chains, that these bankruptcies that occur at a single point in the supply chain, well, that's only one supplier here or there, it can't be that bad. Well, there are what they call contagion effects that occur prior to and after bankruptcies. So if a supplier knows a customer is going to go bankrupt, they may back away from even supplying that customer and even put them into further risk. Customers, wary of quality and warranties and so forth, may reduce their purchases from a supplier and even further accelerate that particular thing. So really, if you look at it, buyers and sellers are in this together. We really have to think today in terms of supply chains and not just single entities. And you can kind of see what happens. This is some data that was looked at. And it does, in fact, flow up and down the supply chain. A bankruptcy in a supply chain impacts the entire chain and, in fact, can begin to bankrupt other parties in that same chain. And if you look at the data based, and this was backward-looking research, those companies, once you go into Chapter 11, well, it's only about 30% that actually make it through without being merged or acquired or going under completely. Now, those aren't good odds. 30% is not a bet that I would take in Vegas or anywhere else for that matter. So if you think of it, if someone goes into Chapter 11, 30% survival rate, that's not good. And it could really be interesting to see how these companies work. We had someone from Nortel Networks on a panel discussion last week in Raleigh. Nortel, of course, is in Chapter 11, and this individual, it's actually one of my former students, was in the war room at Nortel when they declared Chapter 11 and was taking all the phone calls from suppliers. You can tell, the level of panic and the level of just craziness that occurs under those scenarios is something to be really, it can't even be described. So it does put huge stress on these companies, and their ability to continue to do business under these conditions in a Chapter 11 state is very, very difficult. Very difficult to get suppliers to sell you product, to even sell your product to customers, and it becomes more and more difficult. So what are people doing in the face of all this? Well, just to give you a little bit of background, this is research that's been going on for almost a year now, and we began holding workshops with SIPs in the UK and London on the subject. We held a workshop in December in Raleigh with a number of companies, and we had some guest speakers. We held another workshop in Houston with oil and gas executives looking at this, and then another one last week in Raleigh with kind of a follow-up. And we've launched surveys in the U.S., in the U.K., in Brazil. I have a graduate student working with me we have a list of some 200 companies in Brazil that were part of this. And finally, of course, this group here as well. A smaller group, but very, very interesting data nevertheless. So we really looked at key areas such as financial impacts, short-term planning, customer supplier impacts, investments, and human resources. And I'm going to share with you today really kind of the highlights. We looked at those responses where there were really significant differences between the three country responses. So this is really just kind of a highlights view, and the full results we can certainly provide to you at a future time. So one of the first things that companies do, of course, in a downturn is they put merger and acquisition deals on hold. Or do they? Again, it depends on who you are. If you are a company with a lot of cash, this is a darn good time to be in the marketplace. And in fact, most companies are slower to put in new deals, but in the U.S., we've seen actually a lot of buying activity going on, and in the U.K. as well. Many of those have occurred in biotech and pharma. So we've seen major acquisitions from Roche buying Genentech, Pfizer buying Wyeth, GSK, I think, bought a smaller company here. So those organizations that have cash are taking the opportunity to consolidate their product line, consolidate the industry, extend it, and to some extent that is being done in Canada as well. We saw the big merger between Suncor and Petrocan occurring, and people are saying, well, if we're going to go through a disruptive period, through an acquisition, through a merger, maybe now's not a bad time to do it. And so we're seeing